I have a PowerPoint presentation, but before we get into that, let me start by saying Section 801 of the New York State Education Law says this, and I'm quoting, "This law was passed in 1947, it's still there. The law says all teachers of this state will teach all children of this state in public and private schools from grade 8 on," still quoting, "the history, the meaning, the significance, and the effect of all the provisions of our state and federal constitutions as amended, and the Declaration of Independence." My wife and I, Judy, raise your hand, just say hi. We graduated together in 1957. We weren't taught. Our kids and grandkids weren't taught. Rising generation after generation are not taught. Most don't even know there's a state constitution that governs the activities and controls the government of this state far more so than does the federal constitution, which hardly ever comes into play in the day-to-day administration of the state. So so people don't know when the government has stepped outside the boundaries. We have drawn around their power through the state constitution and the U.S. Constitution. So tonight we're going to go through some of those problems, and I'm going to offer a solution. This meeting tonight will be a test case. Depending on your reaction, and I want to hear from you after, when we get to the Q&A stage, I want your reaction to this solution to this problem. As I said earlier tonight to someone, a solution is only as good as the definition of the problem. I don't say this out of any sense of pride or anything like that, but I think I've got as good a definition of the problem we have in this country as anybody. I've been at this for 45 years, quite by accident. In 1979, I was living on the east side of Lake George, raising thoroughbred horses and racing them, raising sheep and chicken and kids. Life was good. I was working for General Electric, the Corporate Research and Development Center. Along the way, I had conceived of a solution to a major problem in America, received a personal phone call from the Republican governor of Connecticut asking me to go there to get the laws and programs started. I did that. Received a personal phone call from Governor Hugh Carey to do the same thing here in New York, and also a personal phone call from Doug Costill, the administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I was heavily involved. I had conceived of this concept of regional solid waste utilities, privately owned and publicly regulated, to take everything we're throwing away and process it, get the tin off the tin cans and recover everything for reuse. So life was good. I was heavily involved in that endeavor. In the 70s, 1979, my county and town of Queensbury, and the county of Warren County began to tell all of the people in the area that Lake George, in their words, quote, was going to turn pea soup green in 6 to 10 years because everybody's on-site septic system was contaminating the lake. And they put a proposal on the ballot to extensively sewer the Lake George watershed, run that line down Route 9, some 15 miles to the Hudson River, where it would be treated and dumped into the Hudson River. And the day came when the man they put in charge of that project, Norman Barnes, was going to be talking at the little firehouse around the bend from where we lived. And I nudged Judy and said, let's go. I have some questions. We got to the firehouse. The place was packed. When he finished speaking, I raised my hand. It changed my life. He said, no questions. If you have any questions, see me later. I think he knew who I was. I had been a full-time advisor to the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency on this concept that I had developed. And I nudged Judy. Place was packed, but I nudged Judy and said, let's go. Got home, got on the phone. We'd only been around the lake 10 years. I called people that had been around longer. Is there any algae on the shores? No. Is there any restriction on eating the fish? No. Is anybody getting a rash when they go swimming? No. I said, what is going on? I decided to investigate. It changed my life. What I learned, back in those days, the only gambling casinos were on Indian reservations in the 70s. And there was a bill going through the state legislature to authorize 7 or 8 commercial casinos, gambling casinos around the state. And I learned, of course, that Lake George, then and now, was a family-oriented seasonal destination area, very popular. The lake is beautiful. Thomas Jefferson visited it and called it the Queen of America's Lakes. So what I learned was this bill was going to authorize 7 or 8 additional commercial casinos off of Indian reservations. And that all of the people who owned all the principal tourist attractions in the lake were behind this effort. But I also learned that a law was passed 2 years earlier in New York State, the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act. And under that act, projects like this, you had to look at all the alternatives, including the no-action alternative. You had to quantify the impacts of each alternative and compare the totality of those impacts and choose the alternative that would have the least adverse impact on the environment, taking the economy into consideration, and they were not going to follow that law. I did something I had never done before, never had an attorney, never sued the government, formed the Tri-County Taxpayers Association. We hired an attorney outside of the area named Lou Oliver from Albany. We brought the lawsuit saying, wait a minute, you got to follow that law. That case went all the way to the high court in the state. We prevailed. They did the review that the law required, and that review, the bottom line was, if they went ahead and extensively sewered the Lake George watershed to make room for all of this development that was going to follow with commercial casinos, that it would have a devastating adverse impact on the environment, and the project could not go forward and hasn't gone forward since that lawsuit since we prevailed in that lawsuit in the early 80s. But it changed my life. I saw government in a way that I had never seen it before. not above, for instance, manufacturing a crisis and concocting a solution that's going to benefit a few of them and their friends at everybody else's expense and violate the law in the process. Wow. That was a shock. And I became interested in our history. I went down to Thomas Jefferson's home, toured the facility. There was a book there called The Constitutional Thought of Thomas Jefferson, purchased it, read it, and so forth. And I decided that I was going to, it was just a calling. I can't explain it, but I gave up my career and decided that I would spend my time holding government accountable to the rule of law, which begins with our state and federal constitutions and the laws pursuant thereto. And I've been at it solidly for 45 years. The latest case, yes, someone's crying back there. Anyway, there's a PowerPoint presentation, there's a lot of information, so why don't we get right to that. And I can't control the advance or go back from here. I have to ask for the next slide. So, all right, this is a...
You didn't say the last case.
Okay, I'll say the last case. Our state constitution, Article 7, under the finance article, prohibits public funds from traveling from the state treasury to a private corporation in aid of a private undertaking, obviously. And Article 8 prohibits public funds from traveling from local treasuries, county treasuries, for instance, to a private corporation in aid of a private undertaking. I won my very first case against Mario Cuomo in 1990 on that very provision of the Constitution, using public funds in aid of a private undertaking. So anyway, our state constitution also requires state budgets be adopted by April 1st every year. They're always late. But in 2022, in April, the governor submitted bills to the legislature, who immediately approved them. It's all one-party control. There was no debate, and they were approved. And I learned about it from the media. They were talking about these bills that were going to provide $850 million to go towards the construction of a new stadium for the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo. And I knew that that was against the Constitution. But the media, they're not educated. Civic education is for naught in this country, and the media doesn't, not only the people, but the media, they don't know the Constitution either, I suppose. So they were just talking about it as, you know, something that's happened. So I got together with Tony Futia here on this end of the state, and two of our friends on the other end of the state, and the four of us brought a lawsuit. And we went to the lowest court in the state, and it was dismissed. The judge there said, well, there's a public purpose involved here. We argued, wait a minute, there's a public purpose involved in everything that the private sector does. If there was no public purpose involved, there'd be no public demand, there'd be for the products and so forth. And we appealed it, and they affirmed the lower court. I'm sorry to tell you this, but in my experience, the judiciary is politicized. It's quite corrupt. Sorry. The Constitution is all about, state and federal constitutions, these are all about power between the people and the government. The ultimate power is designed to rest with us. We set the government up to secure our rights. If we go to court on a constitutional violation, That's an issue of power. And if the court rules against the government, they're not increasing the government's power. Jefferson said, it's in the natural order of things for government to gain ground and liberty to lose ground. So, in any event, we appealed it. They affirmed. So the next step in New York State is to go to the highest court in the state, the New York State Court of Appeals. So we filed what's called a petition for a writ of certiorari. And the federal question involved is this, which has been involved right along in our case. The U.S. Constitution, Article 4, Section 4, this is a quote, guarantees the people of the states a government republican in form, basically meaning based upon the consent of the people as expressed in their state constitutions. That's a guarantee. That's a right guaranteed in the federal Constitution. So we went to the High Court and said, look, this violates the Constitution. The New York State Court of Appeals did, for the 25th time in cases our organization has brought to the High Court against the government. That's all we do. We're not political. We just defend the Constitution, state and federal. And the High Court, in one sentence, did this for the 25th time. Dismissed or denied, the petition is denied. No substantial constitutional question directly involved. What makes one provision of the Constitution more substantial than another? That's such nonsense. So the court, they conference every Friday when they're in session. So the High Court in New York State issued that. We filed a motion for reconsideration, same thing, one sentence, no substantial constitutional question directly involved. I should have mentioned, Governor Hochul's from Buffalo. Her husband is a high-level executive in the corporation known as the Buffalo Bills, LLC. The Buffalo Bills, LLC is owned 100% by Terry Pugalis and his wife. Their net worth, $7 billion. And here we are, helping them build a $1.6 billion stadium. So the New York State Court of Appeals denied it. We filed our petition for writ of certiorari to the U.S. Supreme Court, fully expecting them to hear this case, knowing the odds along. They get 10,000 applications a year, and they hear very few. They conference, the judges at the U.S. Supreme Court conference on Friday. It's not publicized. You don't know who said what in that conference. But they conferenced, and this past Monday, as they do every Monday, they publish those cases that they've agreed to hear. There were 4, and the ones that they've agreed not to hear, there were 65, including ours. No substantial constitutional question directly involved, so says the Court of Appeals, and the highest court in the state, and the Supreme Court, even though the federal question had to do with the guarantee clause, they decided not to hear it. So it's been that way. My takeaway from these years of work is individuals and small groups cannot prevail, yes. We need to organize. We need to rely on the right to petition. The First Amendment, every state constitution guarantees the right to petition. And the New York State First Amendment guarantees 5 rights: worship, speech, press, assembly, and the right to petition. That right to petition, according to the historical record, says government is obligated to respond And if they don't provide a meaningful response, the people have the right of enforcement. Marbury versus Madison and history shows any right that's not enforceable is not a right. So I'll be talking tonight through this PowerPoint about the right to petition. You know, in 1774, 2 years before the Declaration of Independence, let me go back. 1763. That was the end of the French and Indian War. People had been coming over here and colonizing, and there was a big battle, 7-year battle between France and England over who controls and so forth. France was gone in 1763. England was left with large standing armies, and they started to treat the people here differently than they were treating their own people back in Great Britain. And the people here were petitioning. And for 11 years, they petitioned and got nowhere. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, when you get home, take another look at it. It lists the 26 grievances. And at the end of that list of 26 grievances, let me read it. It says, in every stage of these oppressions, at the end of that list of 26 grievances, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which would define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. There is no question, but we declared our independence because the government was not responding to the people's petitions for redress of grievances. It had gone on for 11 years. And so in 1774, the colonial legislatures, they had a lower house and an upper house, and it was all controlled, of course, by England. But in the lower house, they had elected delegates from the people. And in 1774, hostilities had already begun to break out, Boston especially. And the delegates from these colonial legislatures decided to get together to talk about their problems and what to do about it from the 13 colonies. They got together in Independence Hall in Philadelphia for the first time. And out of that, of course, it came in 1774, this is important, one of their acts, unanimously, you can Google this. Google the letters to the inhabitants of Quebec from these delegates to the Continental Congress in 1774. Quebec was also under English control, and this was an effort by our delegates to get their sympathy and so forth. But in October of 1774, those delegates wrote in the first of the 3 letters, and they said this. It's relevant to what we're talking about. Quote, when government wants money from the people, and they have in any manner oppressed the people, still quoting, the people may retain their money until their grievances are redressed, and thus peaceably procure relief. Without relying on the despised petitions. They knew that they kept petitioning, and government wasn't listening and responding. And so they were saying that's what you do. So in 1776, we got the Declaration of Independence. We know what that says, yes? And the delegates then focused on, for the next, I guess it took until 1788 to get the state constitutions adopted. Ours was adopted in April of 1777, some 8 months or so after the Declaration of Independence. And then the delegates, once that was accomplished, they went to work and focused on a U.S. Constitution. There were delegates, this is important for tonight's presentation, there were delegates at the Continental Congress, Constitutional Convention, that would only approve if there was a Bill of Rights added to the Constitution. And the Bill of Rights was eventually certified by the states in 1791. So from 1791 to 1836, things worked really well in this country. But let's go through the PowerPoint. I'm sorry, I can't control them from here. I have to ask that the next slide be advanced. And let's go through this. There's a lot of information here, maybe too much under the circumstances, but let's go ahead. So we'll discuss the background first. Next slide. The law in New York State is government is based upon the will and the consent of the people as expressed in our state and federal constitutions. No word finds its way into our state or federal constitution except by a vote of the people. And the ultimate power is meant to reside with the people. The ultimate power in America is designed to rest with the people. It says so. We set the governments up to secure those rights. We prohibit their behavior and we mandate behavior. Next slide. The Declaration, as we indicated, Declaration of Independence in 1776, the state constitution, our state constitution, 1777. The U.S. Constitution, about 1788, the Bill of Rights was added in 1791. And then, of course, we have town, county, and city charters. Next. The Declaration of Independence, 1,390 words or so, lists the causes that imperiled the separation, and then these 26 grievances. And we declared our independence because our repeated petitions have been answered only with repeated injury. This is important. We declared our independence, it says so, because our repeated petitions were answered only with repeated injury. We're petitioning today. Our repeated petitions are being answered only with repeated injury. What are we going to do about that? All we're looking for is admit or deny, a meaningful response. We don't even get that. Principles, fundamental principle, of course, underlie the form of government that was to follow. Next. Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are, remember, I read the state education law earlier. This information is not being taught to our children. These fundamentals. Civic education is for naught. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Next. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. We have the right of enforcement. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations. I'm still quoting from the Declaration of Independence, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And then there's a listing of those 26 grievances. Next. Next, after those grievances, in every stage of these oppressions, we've petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which would define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. This failure of the government to respond to petitions by today's constitutional scholars is referred to as the capstone grievance, the grievance that capped all the others, their refusal to respond to petitions. Next. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress, do in the nature and by authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, and for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. We need to do this today. We need to pledge to one another our support. Delegates to the Continental Congress then focused on adopting their state constitutions, as I've indicated. Next. April 20, 1777, the New York State Constitution. The 1776 Declaration of Independence was included in its entirety as the preamble to the New York State Constitution when it was initially adopted. Next. By its terms, the people structure and regulate the government, prohibiting the government from acting in certain ways and mandating that it act in other ways. It cannot be changed except by a vote of the people. Next. The current Constitution in New York State is its fifth. Our current Constitution is our fifth. Original 1777, 1821, there was a constitutional vote to adopt a new constitution, 1846 and so forth. In 1938, the current Constitution has been amended hundreds of times. Next. There are two ways to amend our state constitution. The legislature can put a proposed amendment on a statewide ballot. After it, the legislature passes it in 2 consecutive legislative sessions, or revisions proposed by a constitutional convention are placed on a statewide ballot. Next. Article 19 mandates, there's 2 pathways to a constitutional convention. Article 19 mandates that the question go on the ballot every 20 years. The last time it was on our ballot, I believe, was in 2017. So in 20 years after that, the question must be on the ballot again. Do we want a constitutional convention? And it can also go on if and when the state legislature decides to place the question on the ballot. Next. The New York State Constitution now contains the following preamble and 20 articles. We, the people of the state of New York, grateful to Almighty God for our freedom, in order to secure its blessings, do establish this Constitution. And there are those articles, the first 10 are listed there. Won't go through them each. Those 10 articles, next slide, and 10 more. 20 articles in our state constitution. Next. The New York State Constitution, no provision of the state constitution or laws pursuant thereto can conflict with any provision of the U.S. Constitution. No provision of our state constitution can conflict with a provision of the U.S. Constitution or its laws. Next. The United States Constitution, adopted in 1788 on condition that a Bill of Rights would be added. The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, was added in December of 1791. Next. The U.S. Constitution contains the following preamble, 7 articles, and 27 amendments. The preamble, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Next. And there are the 7 articles in our U.S. Constitution, been there since the beginning. Next. It's been amended 27 times. There are the first 10 amendments dealing with those subjects. Next. 9 more amendments. Next. Up to 27 amendments to the beauty of our system of governance. We can change, if we need to, we can amend our constitutions. We've done so many times. But the ultimate power must always rest with the people. And government is there to secure our rights. Next. So let's look at the problem. Here in New York State, at least. Next. The warning at the time of the adoption of our state and federal constitutions was unheeded. Jefferson's warning. He warned, no government can continue good except under the control of the people. It is in the natural progress of things for liberty to yield and government to gain ground. Most people are very busy. The government, it's natural, he's saying, what's been happening. The government controls education. It's clear the government has decided it's not going to teach the children that they have the ultimate power, and government is there to secure their rights. Rather have the children believe that the government has the ultimate power. That's what's been happening. Liberty has been yielding. Government has been gaining. Government has been violating the provisions, has been stepping outside the boundaries that we have, the people have drawn around its power by the terms of our state and federal constitutions. I told you about the Buffalo Bills case. That's a judicial repeal. By the court's behavior, they have in effect judicially repealed the provision that says no public money. We're a capitalistic society. We're not socialistic. This isn't socialism. No money can move according to the will of the people without an amendment to the Constitution. No money can move from a public treasury in aid of a private corporation, in aid of a private undertaking. What's next? Golf courses? Cruise ships? God only knows. But that provision has been judicially repealed. Let me tell you about another case or judicial repeal that stands out in our history doing this kind of work. We had been winning when we first started this. We won that Lake George case. Then we won the case against Mario Cuomo and the state comptroller, and people around the state were hearing about this, and they, oh my gosh, what about this and what about that? And more lawsuits were being filed, and we were winning. And then in 1990, I don't know, 2 or 3, New York State purchased Attica Prison from itself. They owned it, and they purchased it from itself by issuing bonds to purchase it. And there's a provision in the state constitution that before the state can borrow money, it has to go to the voters, put it on the ballot, and get their approval. It wasn't happening. We went to court. And we prevailed. We struck down. They said, well, the state finance law 123B1 says people can't challenge the government when it borrows money. And we challenged that, and we struck that down. But on the bigger issue, borrowing money to buy Attica Prison from itself, they said latches. Latches is a term. You waited too long. The bonds are out. Well, the bonds may have been out. They weren't sold. They were authorized. But anyway, but immediately there was another issue. The state was going to borrow $20 billion. The New York State Thruway Authority, $20 million. The New York State Thruway Authority and the MTA without voter approval. So we went to court. It went to the High Court of Appeals in Albany. Judge Kay was the presiding justice, chief judge. And they hired, with all of the attorneys that they have in Albany for the state, they hired Arthur Lyman, L-I-M-A-N, to go against me. I'm not an attorney. Arthur Lyman, you may recall, during the Iran-Contra affair, which was televised, he was the attorney when the Senate was holding hearings on the Iran-Contra affair. He was the attorney that the Senate was using. He was up there on the bench grilling Oliver North. They hire him to go against me. And we're before the judges in the Court of Appeals. He stands up and says, well, the legislature may not appropriate the money for those bonds. My response to that was, that'll never happen. That's an admission the state is broke. It'll raise the cost of borrowing for every school district, town, county, and so forth. What does Judge Kay do? Oh, this man, he's so bright. Whatever he says has got to be spot on. She writes in her opinion, so help me God, she writes this. If the legislature appropriates money for those bonds that were issued without voter approval, you know, outside the Constitution, but if the legislature appropriates money, in her words, they would be permissible gifts, and the legislature can gift money to anybody it wants to gift it to. That was a judicial repeal of the provision of the Constitution that says if the state wants to borrow money, it's got to go to the voters for their approval. That was a judicial repeal of that provision, 1994. They haven't gone to the voters since. Hundreds of billions of dollars. They struggle to pay the interest on the debt every year. They struck that provision down, judicially repealed it. The will of the people, trampled.
Time.
Okay. All right. Let's go on. The people, the consequence of all of this, the people of first rank, we're a branch of the government. We're the first branch. We approve the Constitution. We tell them what they can and cannot do. The ultimate power rests with us. The people, the first rank and importance among the branches of the government in the United States have nonetheless been dumbed down and are disorganized. That's the problem. We've been dumbed down and we're disorganized. Individuals and small groups cannot prevail. We don't have they don't respect us. Next. So violations of the law by government in New York State, there are all of these violations. We've got to run through these quick. I put on the top of the list the lack of civic education in violation of the state education law, Section 801. State budgets are adopted in violation of the articles. Public debt is incurred in violation of the Constitution's articles. Legislative due process is replaced by 3 men in a room. State and local money is used in aid of private entities in their undertakings. Next. The Court of Appeals judicially repeals by refusing to hear constitutional challenges. That's a violation of Article 6. The legislature transfers its lawmaking powers to commissions. State Supreme Court justices are being appointed, not elected, in violation of the state constitution. And the laws are passed in violation of the Home Rule Act. When certain laws are passed, they're supposed to, before they pass them, they're supposed to let the local governments know all about it, and they don't. Next. Bills are not on the desks of each legislature for 3 days, as the Constitution requires, to give the people a chance to know that this is happening. They're submitted and they're immediately passed, immediately acted on. Public officials are increasing their compensation without an intervening election. That is, they're increasing it for the term they were just elected to in violation of the Constitution. Next. Votes by the people obtained and counted. We're guaranteed that our elections will be public. These elections, the counting of votes by electronic means, all these drop boxes and everything they do, this is all against the Constitution. Our constitutions guarantee our elections will be public in nature. State militias. Our youngsters don't know we have a state militia, and they may be called upon to serve in our state militias, in our state militia. Next. In short, public servants are taking over the House, and as government is gaining ground, liberty is losing ground. Next. Provisions of the U.S. Constitution routinely violated. The petition clause, they ignore it. Under the petition clause, we can petition if they violate our will as expressed in our constitutions. They are obligated to respond, and if they don't, we have the right of enforcement. General welfare clause is violated, necessary and proper clause, war powers clause, and so forth. Next slide. The money and banking clause, tax clauses, we can go on. This PowerPoint presentation is on our website. Next. So let's talk about a solution real quickly. Next. The Declaration of Independence. Government deriving its just powers from the consent of the governed. Next. We can exercise, what can the people do when confronted with violations of the Constitution by the government? We can exercise our petition rights, secured to us not only by our federal constitution, but by our state in our state constitution, every state constitution. Here in New York State, it's Article 1, Section 9. Next. Under the petition clause, as I say, it guarantees 5 rights: worship, speech, press, assembly, and the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. But also the 9th Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people, including the right of enforcement. Next. Proper constitutionally secured petitions for redress of grievances. We've defined what is a proper petition for redress. You can read that faster than I can read it to you. But in our PowerPoint presentation, we've listed what is a proper petition. Next. What's important to know is that no court in America has ever declared the principal rights of the people and the principal obligations of the government under the Petition Clause. No court has declared those rights. So, in 2011, the U.S. Supreme Court said this: some effort must be made to identify the historic and fundamental principles that led to the enumeration of the right to petition in the First Amendment, among other rights fundamental to liberty. The rights of the people and the obligations of the government are determined by the historical record of the right. What was going on when they added that right, when that right was secured to us? Next. That same Supreme Court, petition as a word, a concept, and an essential safeguard of freedom, is of ancient significance in English law and the Anglo-American legal tradition. U.S. Supreme Court, 2011. Petitions have provided a vital means for citizens to assert existing rights against the sovereign. It's popular sovereignty. It isn't governmental sovereignty. There is an abundant historical evidence that petitions were directed to the executive and legislative branches, not just the judiciary. Next. Rights of speech and petition are not identical. There are those who argue, well, the right to petition is you submit your petition. That's speech. No, it goes beyond submitting the petition. They're obligated to respond. Rights of speech and petition are not identical. Interpretation of the Petition Clause must be guided by the objectives and aspirations that underlie the right. A petition conveys the special concerns of its author to the government and in its usual form requests action by the government to address those concerns. U.S. Supreme Court, 2011. Next. One of the advantages of popular government, of which Jefferson was distinctly aware, was that it afforded a means of redressing grievances against the government without the resort to force. It provided, as he would later put it in his first inaugural address, a mild and safe corrective of abuses which are loped by the sword of revolution where peaceful remedies are unprovided. Next. The right to petition the government for redress of its violations of our fundamental rights includes the right of enforcement. Quote, with every right there is a remedy, and any right that is not enforceable, it is not a right. You find that in Blackstone's commentaries on Anglo-American law, and Marbury versus Madison in Scotia, the Supreme Court in 1803. Next. The Continental, I mentioned this before, the Continental Congress in 1774, in one of the letters to the inhabitants of Quebec, said if money is wanted by rulers who have in any manner oppressed the government, they may retain it until their grievances are redressed, and thus peaceably procure relief without trusting to despised petitions or disturbing the public tranquility. It's a nonviolent solution to the problem of government out of control. Next.
Time.
The Magna Carta made it clear. If you look at the history of the right to petition, it begins with the Magna Carta of 1215. The king said, if we infringe on your rights, you read it up here, and you petition us, and if we don't respond in 40 days, you have the right to take everything we own until your grievances are redressed. And then you may then resume your normal obedience to us. That's in the Magna Carta of 1215. Next. Then you had the Declaration of Rights in 1689 over there. It is the right of the subjects to petition the king, and all commitments and prosecutions for such petitioning is illegal. Next. Thomas Jefferson. The privilege of giving or withholding our monies is an important barrier against the undue exertion of prerogative, which if left altogether without control may be exercised to our great oppression. And all history shows how efficacious its intercession for redress of grievances and reestablishment of rights, and how improvident would be the surrender of so powerful a mediator. The right of enforcement. It's a fundamental right that we have. If government violates our will as expressed in our state and federal constitutions, and we submit a petition for redress of that grievance, and we don't get a meaningful response, we then have the right of enforcement. Next. And in common sense, our papers have been rejected. This is 1776, before the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Paine. Our prayers have been rejected with disdain and only tended to convince us that nothing flatters vanity or confirms obstinacy in kings more than repeated petitioning. Lest there be any doubt, but the whole power of the crown will be exercised to keep this continent as low and humble as possible. Instead of going forward, we shall go backward or be perpetually quarreling or ridiculously petitioning. They were sending petitions over all the time, getting no response. Next.
Time.
So there you have it in our Declaration of Independence. In every stage of these oppressions, we've petitioned for redress and have been answered only with repeated injury. Next. So we had our state constitutions adopted. New Hampshire's makes it very clear, the right of enforcement. The doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd, slavish, and destructive of the good and happiness of mankind. Next. In 1791, with the adding of the Bill of Rights till 1836, everything was fine. People petitioned the members of Congress. It always went to a committee, and every Monday in all of those years, Congress dealt with petitions for redress of grievances. Every Monday. Things worked well. Next. Until 1836. The gag rule, very briefly, very quickly. The Southern congressmen in Congress prevailed and got the gag rule, which said, any of those petitions are going to be permanently tabled. Those petitions coming from those abolitionists seeking to end the practice of slavery. That led to another war over government's refusal to respond to petitions for redress of grievances, just like the Revolutionary War. And by the time the Civil War was over, the right to petition had become the forgotten right until now. It had become the forgotten right. Next. So we need a plan to deal with this. Next. There is a plan. We've been fashioning this plan over the years. We thought we were ready to have a meeting like this and kick it off 3 years ago, but it's been delayed because of a very important major lawsuits, including the Buffalo Bills case, but a couple of others, that's held us up. But the plan deals with a citizen vigilance center. We need to institutionalize citizen vigilance, make it an institution well accepted in our society, just as these other institutions called the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. We need to institutionalize citizen vigilance. In every state, the plan that we have hatched or kicking off here tonight would have a citizen vigilance center. There would be a board of directors. I'm sorry, my eyes are so blurry I can't see that this closely. Someone want to read it? Gary?
Board of directors and committees.
Yeah, okay. Next slide. My preference is that the Citizen Vigilance Center look like that. That's Jefferson's home down in Charlottesville, Monticello. I've got a lot of land up where I live. When we won that case against, that started me on this career, in 1979, we won the case in the early 80s, and I decided to do this, devote my time to holding government accountable to the rule of law. I decided I would never take any money, never be compensated for this, to earn our keep, our family keep, and so forth. I would sell my land a piece at a time. I subdivided the northern end into 11 lots, and I built a long road off of the town road called Constitution Way to service those 11 building lots. And I'm ready to, I've got a 6-acre meadow, beautiful meadow in front of the house that can be served off Constitution Way, and I'm ready to donate that for the Citizen Vigilance Center, unless the board of directors decides it'd be better placed somewhere else. Next. This would be a plan for all New York State residents 18 years of age or older. Next. It would be a new institution to watch and hold government accountable, established as a common and accepted part of society, engaged in civic education and civic action, non-political. It would have supporting members, serving as sort of a committee of safety. Next. It would have a presence wherever government policy is being made. Under this plan to institutionalize citizen vigilance, we would have Constitution monitors, monitoring government policy wherever it is being made in New York State. School boards, town, counties, state, and of course, each state agency would be a branch of the national organization, which would be keeping an eye on the U.S. government. So it would have a presence in every capital, in every town, city, county, and school district. Next. We the People of New York, Inc., one of 50 branches of We the People Congress. We need to make sure that local people on the board of, say, We the People of New York, don't infiltrate, the wrong people don't infiltrate and take over. So these would be branches of a national organization, the We the People Congress. We'd have a board of directors and staff, 9 regions in New York State, the 62 counties divided up into 9 regions, regional coordinators, county coordinators, and all these constitution monitors. Communication up and down, critical. Effective communication. And there would be supporting members. 2.5% of the population participated in the Revolutionary War. If we can get 2.5% of the population of the state, that's 500,000 people. How to do that? Next. So we would begin building the Citizen Vigilance Center, training the Constitution monitors, appointing the regional and county coordinators, hiring the staff, when we reach 500,000 people. The money isn't as important. We don't want people donating large sums. 500,000 people at $25 each to get this off the ground and to maintain it. Next. So you'd have the citizen, when we reach that 500,000 member, you'd have the Citizen Vigilance Center, we'd begin designing and building. We'd hire the legal staff, not necessarily attorneys. It's tough for them. They don't want to get disbarred because they're involved in this kind of activity. And all the skill sets needed. We'd have the Liberty Hour Project, Freedom Keeper events around the state, and so forth. 500,000 members at $25 is $12.5 million. Next. First order of business. You get those 500,000 people or more signing petitions. The first order of business is to get civic education in our schools. Have the generation after generation taught about what we're all about. Next. We absolutely need this in time of a creeping usurpation of our power by the government. We need a successful demonstration of the ability of the people to hold public officials accountable to our Constitution and the laws pursuant thereto, without having to rely on the judicial branch, the electoral process, or violence, relying instead on the power of the First and Ninth Amendments, guarantee of our right to petition the government for redress of grievances, and the right of enforcement. Next. I read what the New York State education law requires. There it is. Every teacher shall teach, all the teachers shall teach all the children from grade 8 on. Not just a single course, but year after year, 8th through 12th grade. The Constitution, all about the history, meaning, effect, and significance of both of all the provisions of both constitutions and the Declaration of Independence. Next. It was adopted in 1947. It's been ignored, never followed. It's there. We want it enforced. Next. The result of the absence of civic education, rising generation after generations have not been anchored to the principles of liberty and freedom, their charters of freedom, or their divine rights as free men and women. Most do not know there is a state constitution, much less that it governs the actions of the local and state governments, far more so than does the federal constitution, which hardly comes into play. They don't know when their local and state government has stepped outside the boundaries drawn around their power. Next. So the goal in this plan is a shift in the ultimate power in our state from the government back to the people where it was meant to reside in the first place. We want an amendment to the New York State Social Studies Learning Standard for civic citizenship and government, bringing it into compliance with the requirements of the New York State education law. Next. So an enforcement petition, an enforceable petition signed by at least 500,000 citizens representing the 688 school districts and served on the Board of Regents, this would be the first order of business once we reach that 500,000 figure. Next. Communications is going to be key to the success of this new institution, up and down the chain, from the top all the way down to every school district, town, county, and so forth, and on up. Next. So this is a call to action. Let's return to our charters of freedom. Let's rely on the original meaning of those words. Next. Let's establish a Constitution Watch for the people and so forth. Standing on the charters of freedom, relying on rights to petition and remedy, standing for civic action and civic education, a critical mass of people, monitoring government policy wherever it's being made, state, regional, county, and so forth. Trained Constitution monitors, Citizen Vigilance Center in every state, interdisciplinary board of directors. Next. Bringing together the energy of those standing for these things: government transparency, legislative due process, judicial accountability, civic education, and so forth. Jury rights, home rule, sound currency. Next. And an organization helping those struggling against corporate welfare, public debt, laws that favor public over private education, unfunded mandates, undeclared wars, open borders, defunding the police, and so forth. Next. We the people shall either rally around the divine rights of free men, the Constitution, and the rule of law, putting America back on her course, as only we can, the people, only we can, or we will continue to rely on the promises and assurances of men experiencing more debt, dependency, and decay as America unravels. Next. So, become a member. This is a kickoff. I'll be going all around the state, seeking 500,000 members at $25. That money will go into the bank, Trustco Bank in Queensbury. It will remain untouched until the 500,000 person joins. That money will remain untouched until then. I ask you tonight, you can join at $25 a year. You can go to wethepeopleofny.org on your cell phones. And on the header, once you go to wethepeopleofnewyork.org, you'll see on the header the word participate. You can click on there. At the bottom of the page that comes up, there's a couple of articles, but at the bottom of that page, there's a link to become a member of We the People of New York. Or, if you care to tonight, I'll pass out these envelopes. You can put in a check, cash, but on the envelope, write your name, your address, your county, your school district. Your name, your address, your county, and your school district. And I'll pass these out. And with that, if we have time for questions?
Way over.
Way over.
Way over.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Can you stay, Bob, until afterwards, and then they can talk?
Yeah, okay.